Hello and welcome back to The Offensive Line. On this week's episode, we have my friend Ivana to share with us about how she would use this evangelism question: do you go to church? A very simple question, but a good one to ask, especially when you're talking to a stranger or a coworker or a classmate, someone that you don't know that well, because then you can ask them, why don't you go to church if they don't go to church? And if they do, then you can ask them more questions about their church. So without further ado, I will let Ivana speak more on this topic.
Yeah, I mean, you already pretty much mentioned a little bit of why I love this question so much. It's the fact that it comes up easily in conversation. You can just talk about your day, and as a Christian, of course, if you love the Lord, then you want to talk about Him, and I'll talk about church with my coworkers or my family. And then because that question is so, I guess a lot of things, other questions can come afterwards. You can ask, if they do go to church, what kind of church they go to, and learn more about their maybe religious background. It might not always be a good church. It could be, their idea of church is, I don't know, a temple, like a Buddhist temple or something. Or it could be, a good church. Or they could not go to church, and then you gotta talk more about, why not? Or do you know anything about God? And you can kind of ask a lot of fun follow-up questions that lead to deeper spiritual conversations.
Yeah.
That's why I like that question. I use it pretty often, I would say, in just conversation too, even without being very intentionally I'm going to share the gospel to this person today.
Sure.
And then it becomes opportunity. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's good. Something that we are all about here on The Offensive Line is just being normal, right? Just being, you don't have to go about your day just doing whatever and then I have to be an evangelist right now. I have to be a Christian who actually shares the gospel right now. But that should be who you are, right? That's normal Ivana, is just excited about church, excited about the gospel, excited about the Lord. And it's not something you just have to turn on a switch, but it's just you just be normal, and then you have normal conversations. And normally, you share about, like you said, you share about the things that you're excited for, right? So, and you're excited about the church. We're excited about the church. We're excited about everything relating to God, to the Bible, sharing about scripture, about what we're learning in church, and all of these different things. So it's an interesting question that you have, or that we have for this episode. Do you go to church? Because I'm sure that you've encountered many people. I know that I've encountered many people when using this question, or even not using this question, where they would say that they're Christian, but then they don't go to church. So then if you want to know more about that, you can check out our video in season 1 about why Christians go to church and what the purpose of the church is. But for now, just wanted to ask your thoughts on that. How would you respond to people like that?
Yeah, I think growing up, I heard a lot of teachers say that to me. Kind of funny that they bring it up in class. But I mean, if you read, for example, 1 John, there's a bunch of verses that talk about how it is very related. For example, I guess one of my favorite verses in 1 John is from chapter 3:23. Says, "This is His commandment, that we believe in the name of His Son Jesus Christ and love one another, just as He commanded us. The one who keeps His commandments abides in Him, and He in him. We know by this that He abides in us by the Spirit whom He has given us." So a lot of times, the fact that you see it's very tied, the idea that someone who is a believer, a true believer who loves the Lord, will also love His people. And that's the church. And so someone who doesn't want to go to church or doesn't have a desire to be with God's people almost kind of calls into question, do they love the Lord? Even more thinking about, who the church is, and if it's Christ's bride, the church is very much treasured by God, and it's, the people who He's interceding for every day, and sanctifying and purifying, so that, we may be presented as a bride to Him. Why would you not love, I guess, the church if you don't, I don't know, if you see the preciousness that the church is to God.
Yeah.
So I guess one fun way to use this question, even for people who are professing believers, is to almost sometimes reveal the fact that they might not be a believer. Sometimes, maybe they will be, but you can't say exactly for sure, but it's good for furthering on that conversation.
Yeah, and then on the flip side of that, there are people as well who go to church, but that doesn't necessarily make them Christian. I know when I was before I became a believer, that's actually how I thought of Christianity, was that Christians are people who go to church. So how would you respond to that, and what do you have to say about people that you've encountered who brought that up, where they would say, "Oh, I am a Christian because I go to church," or that's the evidence for them being a Christian, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's also a really fun flip side of, we can't automatically assume just because people go to church and say yes to that question that first of all that it's even a good church, or that they believe in the true gospel. And so I guess a lot of times it's sad to think that a church, you can be in a church and be deceived, and partially it's maybe because the church isn't really preaching the truth, and so they just believe whatever falsehood that's there, and they're never a true believer. And sometimes I also think it reminds me of this verse in Hebrews 3 that talks about how we are to encourage one another day by day and make sure that there is no evil, unbelieving heart. The church also kind of has a fun responsibility to get to know each other and to see if there is someone who is maybe not a true Christian.
Yeah.
I guess as a Christian, if someone says that, like, "Oh, I go to church, obviously I'm a believer," I probably want to see how they think more, what they really believe about God, what they believe about sin, and kind of like do what Hebrews 3 says.
Yeah, I would almost say that for people who say that they're Christian and their evidence for them being Christian is that they go to church, I would already understand it and kind of approach them as they're definitely unbelievers, because they don't know what it is that makes us Christian, which is the gospel, the heart of Christianity. As I mentioned before I was a Christian, this is how I thought, that it was all just about an outward performance, about things that you do. You go to church, you say certain things, you act a certain way, and that's what makes you Christian. But no, it's actually an internal change, right? And Romans 10 talks about how if you believe in your heart, if you confess with your lips, and you make that choice to be a Christian, and it starts inside, right? So it's good that we had a conversation about that, got to talk about that a little bit. So as always with all of our guests, we want to know how they're doing in their evangelism. So if you would like to share with us and with the viewers as well who want to get to know you better, what is a recent evangelism opportunity that you've had that we can be praying for? It could be related to this question or not, but what is something that we can be praying for you for?
Yeah, I guess you use this question a lot because there are so many different avenues of taking this question. So a bunch of ideas come in my head of people I could talk about, but I guess one of them, there's a friend of mine, they profess to be a believer, but I'm pretty sure they're not, I guess, based on, what they say about God and what they say about, their desire to even learn or know Him. And so for example, there was a weekend where they decided not to go to church because of some other event with some friends. And so I got to challenge them with that question of, you're not going to church. What do you think that tells your friends? Your decision to not go to church tells them something about your priorities.
Yeah.
And also, challenges them kind of indirectly of like, oh, like maybe my priorities are a little different than, for example, Ivana is going to church this weekend
every Sunday.
That in itself is like not necessarily, indicative of my heart necessarily,
like what we just talked about.
But yeah, I think that was a fun conversation to just have and, poke a little bit more in revealing to them that they might not be a true believer. And then also in that kind of going around and asking them, well, like, what have you been learning so far in church? What have you been thinking about, like, do you still read the Bible? Or just thinking about like things that a normal believer would love to do, not because they think, you know, it saves them and it's just like good works that they do, but because we love God and because we love His Word. So that's one example. Pretty like, I guess not always happens in that way with that question.
Yeah, I mean, people are different, conversations are different, you know, there's always different contexts, different upbringings. You know, God created people to be unique. We're all created in the image of God, but we're all uniquely formed, right? And have different upbringings. That's why evangelism is so fun. It's just not all one formulaic way of doing it every single time, but you have to think about it, you have to kind of strategize, you have to have a conversation with them, it's a back and forth, right? So I hope you guys had fun for this episode of The Offensive Line with our guest Ivana here, just hearing about her evangelism and about how she would use this particular question in evangelism. If you want to know more, you can comment down below in the comment section. Ask Ivana any questions. If you have any questions, you can ask us in the channel for The Offensive Line. You can like this video, give us a like, subscribe as well if you want more content like this. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and we'll see you next week for The Offensive Line as we continue in this series. Great evangelists ask great questions. Bye.